coming on a Friday evening. It's very good to be with you. And thank you to all of those who are going to be watching later on. I'm Clare, and this is Micah, who is my son. And together we have worked on this book, Unveiled, which some of you have already bought copies of. So thank you for doing that, even before we started. It's up there on the screen. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book and how we came to do a book on women of the Old Testament. Then I'm going to tell 3 stories of fantastic women that are in the Old Testament, and then there'll be a time to look at some of Micah's pictures and ask him anything you want to ask about the process that he went through creating all the pictures. So just a little intro. I had never thought that I would be writing a book on Old Testament anything. And how it emerged was, a few years ago, I went into the picture framing shop that's down the Abingdon Road. I don't know if you ever know it, down the Abingdon Road on the right. And I was in the picture framing shop with Micah, and I was wearing a collar. And the chap who runs it said to me, question that I'm sure Sky loves, which is, you're a vicar, you'll know the answer to this question, which you're always dreading. And he said, my daughter-in-law is called Miriam, and I know she's in the Bible, can you tell me about her? And I realised that I didn't really know very much about Miriam at all, other than something about Moses. And so I scuttled behind, because then someone else came into the shop, so I scuttled behind the frames and Googled Miriam and looked her up on Wikipedia so I could give him a better, more fulsome answer. And I realised I had big gaps in my knowledge. I didn't kind of grow up in church youth groups at all. I came to faith in my early 20s and read the Bible and went to theological college, but we didn't do an awful lot of Old Testament, and I found it quite difficult to grasp in much of it, other than the sort of Psalms and wisdom. And so I realised that I had massive gaps in my Old Testament knowledge, and also of the women in the Old Testament. So I set myself a challenge, and it was in 2020, in Lent, to do a blog post on a woman a day for the whole of Lent, so 40 women in Lent 2020. And I had intended to do New Testament women as well, because I didn't think there'd be that many women in the Old Testament that would be interesting. But when I got going, I realised there were just so many brilliant stories in the Old Testament that we just don't know about, and I had never heard of. And once I started researching, I thought, wow, these are brilliant stories, but we don't really hear them very much when we, in sermons or even in children's books and stories. So I stuck with the Old Testament, did this blog, and then people seemed to quite like it, and so someone suggested maybe it could be a book. And then Micah, who is my talented artist son, we worked together to put together this book. And so it's BRF, which is Bible Reading Fellowship. They do the Bible notes, like Daily Bread or Living Daylight, and then all the Messy Church and Anna Chaplaincy, I don't know if you know of. And they're in Abingdon, so they're really lovely local publishers. So they work with us to create the book. So I thought before we start, we'll do a little, next slide please, a little who you already know. So without looking at the book that you've got in front of you, some of you, let's try and count up. We don't normally get beyond, last night I was in Swindon and we got to kind of 18. Ooh. So they did quite well. So the ladies of Swindon did quite well. So see how many women of the Old Testament we know already. They were a bigger group, so I think they could have at least 10 more than us. Who do we know already? Eve. Exactly, Eve. Bathsheba. Great story, Bathsheba.
Miriam,
Sarah.
already mentioned.
I mentioned Miriam.
Hannah.
Ruth. Hannah.
Judith.
Judith's
That's
in
my
the
name.
in the Apocrypha. Judith's not in the book, but Judith counts.
She should have been.
She counts. She should have been.
Jezebel.
Jezebel.
Oh, yes.
Susanna. That's
Esther.
great. Not many people know. I've never heard the story of Susanna, and it's an amazing story. Esther.
Deborah.
Deborah.
Jael.
Jael. We've had Tempeg.
Hagar.
Hagar. Leah. We're doing well.
Rachel.
14. Rachel. Delilah.
You count her.
Rahab.
Rahab. 17.
Oh, come on. Look at you.
Come on. Queen of Sheba.
Can we have Noah's wife?
Noah's wife.
And his son's
Yeah, that's not Noah. No, we're only going to allow one and Noah's wife.
The
We
widow
have
of
Dinah.
Dinah. 20.
The widow is it
Zarephath.
Zarephath.
Yes. 21.
Lot's wife.
Lot's wife. We are small but absolutely on fire. You have had Delilah.
Yes.
Oh no, I don't know if we have.
Yes,
Why?
we have.
Yes, did we have Delilah?
Micah.
Michal. Yeah.
David's daughter.
David's first wife.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm going to show you them all in a sec. You'll kick yourself and some of them, I think. I know, you're like, come on.
Two daughters
I think
I don't know their
Jeremiah.
names.
The two daughters.
Of
Um,
I know him, and he worked for one, and then finally worked.
Oh, that's Leah and Rachel.
Rahab.
We've had Rahab.
Tamar.
Tamar. Didn't have Tamar, well done, yeah. I think that's 24.
Lemuel's mother.
Oh, blimey. I forgot Lemuel's mother. Actually, frankly, all of them have mothers. She is mentioned. Moses' mother, do you know Moses' mother's name? Jochebed.
Zipporah.
Zipporah is
Moses' wife.
Moses' wife. Yeah, I forgot. I didn't.
Is it Orpah?
Orpah, yeah. So Ruth and Orpah with Naomi, and Orpah goes back, and Ruth carries on. That's very good. Let's see them all. If you will do the next slide.
How many was that we got?
You got 28, which is very good.
Then you got Potiphar's wife.
So Eve, Sarah, Hagar, Lot's wife. You got Rebecca, Rachel and Leah. Yeah. So Rachel and Leah were sisters, both married to the same man, weren't they? Jacob. Which was, source of much conflict, as you can imagine. Dinah, Tamar, we got Potiphar's wife. Did we have Potiphar's wife? Seduced young Joseph and got him into prison. Shipra and Pua. I'm glad you didn't have them because I'm going to be telling you about them just in a moment. Jochebed, yeah. Miriam, I'm going to be telling you the story of the daughters of Zelophehad, which nobody's ever heard of, but everybody should have heard of them because they're
They
brilliant.
asked for the money.
Rahab, Naomi, Ruth we had, Deborah, Jael we have, didn't we? Nobody knows the story of the first Mrs. Sampson. She has a terrible wedding.
Yeah.
The wedding guests fight so much over the riddle. You know, on the Tate and Lyle, honey sweeter than honey. The lion and the honey. Out of the eater something sweet. You know that one.
It is an unguessable riddle.
An unguessable riddle, and the guests fight so much they're completely at war with each other, and the wedding ends with one bunch of guests getting a load of foxes, 400 foxes, and tying burning torches to their tails and setting them loose in their enemies' fields. And then she's killed with all her family. So it's a bit of a gruesome, poor first Mrs. Sampson. Delilah, Jephthah's daughter. I'm sure you've heard of Jephthah's daughter. She's the one with the vow. He makes that whole awful vow that if he wins battle, the first thing that comes out of his house is sacrifice to the Lord. And it's Jephthah. Such a sad story. You can't really do a book on the women of the Old Testament without quite a lot of gruesome kind of trigger warnings. Hannah, did we remember Hannah?
Yeah.
We did. Mikhail, first wife. Abigail.
Let's give them back.
She does. See, I think Abigail should be preached on because she gives the longest peacemaking speech, I think, in the Bible, and it's brilliant. She's married to a boorish, drunken husband, and her husband picks a fight with David, who isn't quite king, but he's looking after all the farms. And David and his people are coming to fight with her husband, and she goes and throws herself at David and does this brilliant peacemaking speech where she takes him gifts, she tells him her husband's a fool, don't listen to him, and then she tells him, remember what you're called to be. You know, she kind of, remember who you are, David, you don't want his blood on your hands. And he turns away, and it's a brilliant story. The medium of Endor, she summons up Samuel's spirit. Rizpah, anyone heard of Rizpah? Her sons are killed, and she waits with their bodies until they can be buried properly. So she sits for 6 months. Pretty gruesome, but it's an amazing story of a kind of woman waiting. Best name in the Bible, Abishag the Shunammite. John's joke, my husband's joke is, or she might not. So, Abishag the Shunammite has the best name and the worst job in the whole Bible. And her job, King David is quite elderly and he can't keep his body heat warm at night. So her job is to keep him warm at night. Poor Abishag. But then she's kind of witnesses the transfer of power. So she's sort of one of these women that are kind of really lowly, but in the background of really powerful things happening. And so it's just quite an interesting story. We've had Queen of Sheba, Jezebel, who doesn't deserve being a dictionary definition for a harlot. She was fed to the dogs. She was thrown off a high building, and because she knew she was going to die, she put makeup on. And I think she was just facing her end, but somehow that became probably one of the popes. I don't know who made her sort of into a sort of example of but actually she doesn't. I mean, she killed a lot of people, but. The widow Zarephath, Susanna, which is amazing to know that story. It's just one chapter, but it's great. Shunammite woman. Naaman's maidservant, I think we might have forgotten her. Atalia, I couldn't find a single nice thing to say about Atalia. Most of them I could find some redeeming quality. She didn't really have any. She murdered everyone, including her grandchildren. So she was not. It was in a time of real brutality, and so you can sort of. But in the end, it's just a reminder that even women can also be brutal, and some of these stories remind us why we need redemption, because actually human people can be grim, and Natalia is a good example. Huldah is one of the prophets. Wonderful. Micah's done a fantastic picture of prophetess Huldah. She was actually I think the first in the Bible person who took text and interpreted it to people, because they found a scroll in the temple and nobody could understand it, and they got the prophetess Huldah and she told them what it meant. So actually I think she might have been the first Bible teacher from text, which is quite cool. Queen Vashti, do you know Queen Vashti? She, in the story of Esther, she's King Xerxes' first wife, and he has such massive banquets, they last weeks and weeks and weeks. Drunken banquets in a time of opulence, and he wanted Queen Vashti to be paraded in front of all his drunken friends. We don't know whether with not much on, and basically she refuses to go. So she's one of the first women that actually stands up and says no. And for that she's deposed, and she has to be deposed because all the men are saying, if you allow this, then all our wives will disobey. So they depose poor Vashti, and that leaves room for Esther, who comes on to the scene. And then Shalem's daughters last, who have one line in the Bible, and it's in Nehemiah where they're building the wall around Jerusalem, and it's Nehemiah and they're all having to build the wall. And in Nehemiah 3, there's a whole list of all these men that are part of the building of the wall. List that names, loads of them. And then in the middle, it's got and Shalem's daughters, and you don't know what they were doing as part of that, but I love it because it's, that these women were part of this rebuilding, and it's a good reminder of the importance of, just whatever little bit for the whole. So they're all the women that are in the book. There are others like Zipporah that aren't there, but I'm going to tell 3 different stories of women in the life of Moses, and then you can ask the questions. So if we have the next slide. Oh, the next one, sorry. There. So the first one is the story of Shipra and Puah. So we hadn't heard of them before, but they are right in the. Do you know? What are their jobs?
Midwives.
Yes, the midwives. Any of you midwives?
Yes.
Are you? You are. Both of you.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Shipra and Puah are your foremothers. So they are. So right at the beginning, Exodus 1. So do you remember the story of Joseph where the Israelite people go to Egypt and there's famine and they go to Egypt, and the story of Joseph. And so a lot of the Israelite people have been in Egypt and they're getting more numerous. And the Pharaoh isn't happy about that, and he is threatened by the Israelite people. So he oppresses them and he forces them into slavery, and they still grow in number. And so he gives an edict to Shipra and Puah and the midwives to kill the baby boys that are born. And Shipra and Puah, I think, is the first recorded act of civil disobedience, because they come up with a clever plan, and they say to the Pharaoh, it's a sort of racially charged plan that they come up with, because they say these Israelite women are so strong and vigorous that they give birth before we even get there, and the Pharaoh believes them, and the babies continue to be born, and because of that, Moses is born. And I love the fact that they stand up for that, but I also love the fact that we don't know Pharaoh's name, but we know Shipra and Puah's name, and I really like that they're actually named, and think that that's rather wonderful. So that's the story of Shipra and Puah. So Moses then grows up. He, as an adult, he's given the call to go and tell Pharaoh to release the Israelites from captivity. And you know that they say no, and then there's 10 plagues, and eventually the Israelites are released. So Miriam is Moses' sister, and Miriam was probably the sister who looked over Moses when he was in the basket. It says his sister looked over him. It doesn't say Miriam, but there's no other one mentioned. There's Aaron as well. So Miriam then is with Moses, leads the people through the Red Sea. And the first thing that Miriam does when they reach the promised, when they reach the wilderness through the Red Sea, is she leads the women in singing and they leads the women in worship, and they sing together. It says she gets out her tambourine and leads the women in worship. So Miriam is the first worship leader, male or female, in the Bible. And I really love the fact that even when they were, because they had to flee really quickly, they didn't have time for their bread to rise, they still remembered to take their tambourines. And I think that's rather nice, that they kind of knew that there'd be time that they needed to worship again, and that they needed to they knew that singing and gathering together would be important. So that's Miriam, and she's named as one of the prophets in the Bible, and she's named as one of the 5 female prophets. And then the final of the 3 stories in the life of Moses is the daughters of Zelophehad. I'm going to give you their names because I think that so many of the women, you don't know their names, but so it's important to know that these ones are named. Machlan, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah and Tirzah. And these 5 women, so it was a time when the Israelites had been wandering around the wilderness for 40 years, which means loads of time, we don't really know how long. And they were tribes. So we've got the 12 tribes of Jacob's sons, plus 2 more, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Zelophehad was part of the tribe of Manasseh, and Zelophehad was dead. He died, and he had 5 daughters and no sons. And in this kind of classic patriarchal society, the land went to the sons, and there was if there were no daughters, if there were no sons, the land would go to another tribe, and Zelophehad's name would be lost and would go. So the daughters decided this isn't right. So the 5 daughters of Zelophehad went to the tent of Moses, which is the where all the decisions were made and the elders met. And they went together and they argued their case, and they said, why is it that the land is given to the men? Why can it not go to women in the case where there are no sons? And Moses doesn't know what to do about it. So he prayed about it. And in the night, the Bible said, it's the end of Numbers, it says, the daughters of Zelophehad are right in what they are saying. It's great. And so God intervenes and says, yes, they're quite right, it's an injustice. And so they change the rules. So they change it so that women and girls can inherit, obviously if there are no sons, and also they're allowed to marry who they want as long as it's within that clan. And so that changed the lives of generations of Jewish women. And still today, one of the UN sustainability goals is land rights for women and girls, because they know that that's really important. And if women are given land, then whole families can eat. And so it's still really important. But I love these daughters, and I don't think that if one of them, if Noah on her own had gone to the tent of Moses, she probably wouldn't have even been heard or even allowed anywhere near. But the fact they went together, all 5 of them, I think, it meant that they were quite a force. And they kind of remind me of all the like WI and Mothers Union and all these kind of powerful women's groups, or any kind of group that fights for justice. And they're a real reminder that actually sometimes when you do, actually change happens and you're listened to, and God intervenes and says, yeah, they're right in what they're saying. So they're the 3 stories. So I'll come to an end. I think if we can flick through some of the pictures. So Micah's images. So that's the. Yeah. Do you want Micah come up and just talk through some of the pictures as we go?
So I tried to do a kind of variety. I think these are the ones which you talked about. So the next three, and then there's a few more afterwards. But if you've seen, I mean, some of them behind you and through the book, I tried to kind of use a variety of different like styles and sort of different techniques. So some of them are drawing, some of them charcoal, and some of them are paintings, and some of them are sort of more modern on glass. So they're kind of more like pop arty. And I just wanted it to be sort of accessible, but then not repetitive, so it would keep people interested. And I didn't just want to do 40 portraits, so some of them are figures and hands, and I think one of the biggest challenges was how to convey, so, like for example, Lot's wife, how to convey that story without just drawing a kind of person turned to stone or a block of salt. And yeah, so the Lot's wife is just behind you. It's the hand, kind of. That's just an example of a really sort of tricky one to capture. And also with the time restraint as well. So the 5 sisters, I think it's like the 2 after, having to be, because obviously I didn't have time to draw or paint a big detailed portrait of 5 sisters, so I kind of did silhouettes. But then it kind of worked because. But that was very much, I was totally winging it, I felt, halfway, because there was so many, I sort of, it definitely felt like some of them were a total blessing that came at the right point, but it was, I don't know if anyone has any particular questions.
Have we got some more? If you flick through, there's Rachel.
I have Rachel's, but I think that one, I don't have the original anymore, but that's the
We
favourite.
sold Rachel.
I always resonated with Rachel. I don't know, I like Rachel's story, and I think I had to pick a certain emotion from their story to capture, and I think Rachel's sadness, obviously she wasn't always sad, but I think her story was sort of summed up by that kind of longing for a child, or it's like kind of maybe feeling of being neglected, I don't know. So that's sort of what I focus on. And then this is kind of cropped slightly, the diner, so that's an example of a more kind of like a kind of modern pop art style. And that's done on the glass, so kind of do it on 2 layers. You can't really see it in the photo.
It's back there.
It's back there, yeah. You can see.
Is that sort of collage in the back?
Yeah, actually, if you go back to diner, just if you go to the left, there's actually photocopied some of the scripture in it. Collage that, but the collage isn't that relevant, it's more just fun.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Not because of the content, just the way the pictures stand out.
Jezebel, that was a fun one to do.
We didn't want them all to look like women of that era. You didn't want them to be contemporary.
So like Jezebel and Queen of Sheba are similar in the sense that they're a bit more, maybe a bit more modern looking. But I wanted them. I took some inspiration from sort of traditional paintings, as well as the scripture and what Mum wrote, and I kind of collected different sources to sort of find one. I'd always got like a sense, and I always had a kind of a colour associated with. Sometimes I just associate people with colours, and I do that with everything. But so that a lot of different sort of.
Was there a lot of sketches beforehand, or did you kind of go right into it?
So a lot of them I'll sketch beforehand to see if I like the image, or I'll try it. So I think Sarah I did like 4 times. A lot of them I'd get halfway through it and I'm like, I'll just scrap it and throw it in the bin and start again.
It was quite a trial. It was like 40. Why do we have to do 40? It was quite a lot.
Well, because it has to be. It can't just be like a nice drawing. Like technically, it has to have that kind of spark behind it, which makes it interesting and connects with people. So I think that's what.
So what was your time constraint to do?
We had to get it done by October.
I kept on moving. I moved the deadline like 4 times.
But we did move the deadline a few times because it was
I was
just.
very last. Well, and also making the paintings is one thing, but then making photographs of them to put in the book is a whole different craft, and I think I learned a huge amount. And yeah, that took a lot of time as well, just to actually get digital images to send of them. But
Next.
I think
Jephthah's daughter. We sold that one as well.
I think yeah, some of them I kind of did as I didn't want them necessarily. That could be obviously it's alongside Mum's work, but I quite like the idea instead of them they are illustrations, but in the same sense, Mum's work can be read without my images. I like the idea that my images can be looked at with that. But then this is more of an example of
Can I just say something
Yeah.
there? Edward Elgar wrote an oratorio about this
Yes.
story.
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, it's
There's
quite a
a
sad
few
story, but it's quite
operas.
happy.
And about the different, several of the characters, as I was researching them, there had been music written about them as well. Trying to think which other ones, but yeah, Jephthah's daughter certainly. Yeah. I think that's the last.
I think this will.
Oh no, Huldah.
It's my favourite one.
She's great, isn't she?
Mm.
Yeah.
So what's her story again behind who?
So Huldah was at the time of. Can I just? Look. It was when the temple had been destroyed, and they found a bit of text from the temple, and she was the wife of the keeper of the wardrobe, which I imagine is like a verger or something in the temple. And so
Must be Josiah, isn't it?
Josiah, I think
Or-
that's
or
right.
Hezekiah,
Oh gosh.
but
Yeah, you see, hold on. Prophetess of Doom, I've called her, because basically she has to. It was the time of all the terrible kings, Josiah. They all begin with J. I got really confused.
Josiah was good.
And Josiah was the good one. And yeah, she was a woman from Judah who lived in Jerusalem with her husband Shalem. He was the keeper of the wardrobe. Josiah was one of the few kings who did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. And then they find a book of the law in the ruins, and nobody knows how to interpret it. And they say, go and get the prophetess Huldah. So she must have been renowned as somebody who interprets, and so basically she has to tell them that everything's going to be destroyed because they've fallen away from God. So she has to give them bad news. But Josiah is protected, but after him, because they'd fallen away from God. So she has to give them the news that they don't really want to hear. Hence, prophetess of doom.
Well, that actually does explain her face.
Yeah. Yeah, she's got to give bad news. She's got a wisdom though, I think, hasn't she?
Are they on people that you paint? Are they actually? Do you get ideas for portraits?
They'll often change a bit. I'll have to start with some kind of image. I collect just thousands of images from every. I think Deborah I just saw on the side of the road one time and just took a picture of a
Of a
poster.
person? No, of a
No, sorry. So of like some kind of poster.
The
and
films
then and then I'll change the colours and the composition and often the facial structure kind of changes a bit. And yeah.
He doesn't paint from life.
Well, I could, but it's sort of.
It costs a lot of
would
money to
cost
get
huge
40
amount.
life models of different.
Yeah, and it takes a lot longer than you have to.
Yeah.
Did you know that you were good at portraits when you started this, or is it something that you've developed and got better with as you've done the 40?
I think I'd done it for. So I trained we're quite traditionally at like 2 schools, and that was like really intense sort of draw and portrait training, and that was quite classical training. And I'd done quite a lot of portraits, but I think I definitely learned a lot about the craft side, and I was definitely like developing throughout. I think that's why it took so long. I think if I did it now, I'd be able to, my process is more refined, so I could be a bit more consistent, but I was like kind of, I do one which goes well, and then 2 which goes in the bin, and that's sort of otherwise nice.
A wonderful learning curve.
Yeah.
It's fun to do. Any other questions about the women or the book or for Micah or?
I think, we've all read our Bibles and we think, oh well, yes, I know that story. But actually, you've gone into it in depth and it's made it come to life.
Good. That's yeah, exactly what I would hope. So thank you for saying that. Yeah. Yeah.
What's your next project?
Oh.
The women in the New Testament.
No, I don't think so. I think they've been written about so much, and they're not quite so interesting. Well, they're lovely, but they're not. You don't have the stories in the same way. So I don't know. We sort of thought of doing something about with the, because Michael would love to paint men as well as women, but he does like painting the Bible characters. So we were thinking about doing broken vessels, like looking at characters but through their brokenness, like Moses through the fact that he didn't want to speak, or taking character stories but through their problems and difficult. So that's I've got that in my head, but other than saying that, I haven't actually done an awful lot about it. But whether people would buy that, people buy it, it's women of the Bible, but I don't know.
Did you expand the text from your blog very much for the book?
Yeah, I changed. I had to rewrite it all, but some of it stayed a bit the same. But the blog was quite bloggy, and I had to just make it a bit tighter and more like a book. And so I did a bit, and I added. I had to write a few because I'd got some guest people to do with Saturdays, and I added in Susanna because I'd not even heard her story, and I was like, we need Susanna in here. So I did change it a bit. Yeah. But it helped having the blog, and then I could just work on that.
Well, it's brilliant. Thank you so much. And, yeah,